Hello, and welcome to a new series that I'm beginning called Difficult Topics in the Bible. Today's video is going to be on the Abomination of Desolation in Matthew chapter 24 in general. So, this video aims to answer three questions. First, what is Matthew 24 about? Second, what is the Abomination of Desolation mentioned in verse 15 of the chapter? And finally, how much of the chapter talks about the end of the world in general? First, I will answer the questions, then explain why I believe how I do. Matthew chapter 24 is strictly talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. The Abomination of Desolation is talking about just how terrible an attack the Romans will inflict on the Jews and the Christians. And none of the chapter talks about Christ's return and the end of the world at all. Okay, so what is Matthew 24 about? We have to begin with some context first. Matthew 23 is where Jesus pronounces the woes on the scribes and Pharisees due to their hypocrisy. He even pronounces one on the city itself. Jesus ends the chapter by saying, "For I say to you, you," in both cases of you, he's referring to Jerusalem, "shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Imagine how the disciples must have felt. Such an important location for the Jews, yet Jesus would not be entering the city again? Look at these buildings, the stones, and how wonderful it looks. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another, that shall not be thrown down." And then comes a verse that is a catalyst for confusion. I'm going to be reading the New King James Version intentionally here. "Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming, and of the end of the age?" Now some translations in the verse like this, "And what shall be the sign of thy coming, and of the end of the world?" But that can't be right, and later in this video I'll tell you why. Verse 4 reads, "And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no one deceives you." And while Jesus was talking about the disciples at that time, there are many, even today, who are deceived. But let's return to Matthew 24, shall we? "For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All of these are the beginning of sorrows." What Jesus is referring to here are events and things that, while terrible, are not some supernatural event to give them warnings as to what is to come. If they were, it would contradict the sudden nature of things. Verses 9 through 12 then tell us more about what will take place during this event. There will be tribulation and murder, betrayal and hate. However, for those who survive and endure, they will be saved. Saved from what? Let's read verse 15. "Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Does this abomination refer to something today or in the future? No. It's referring to the Roman occupation of Israel in AD 70, and I can give the reasoning behind my claim. First, let's read verses 32 through 34. Now learn this parable from the fig tree. When its branch has already become tender and puts forth leaves, you know that summer is near. So you also, when you see all these things, know that it is near, at the doors. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away until all these things take place. Please notice this. Everything mentioned in the previous verses can only relate to the abomination, because otherwise, that generation alive at that time would still be alive today. Because of that, verses 29 through 31 can't possibly be talking about when Christ comes again on the last great day. With that in mind, let's read verses 29 through 31. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in heaven, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Okay, then what does it mean? Now, we have to remember who the audience of the book of Matthew was, and that is Jews. We have to look at what is written and base it on the symbols that were mentioned and meant in the past. According to Isaiah 10, it refers to God's judgment on the guilty. Starting in verse 9, Isaiah 10 says, "Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel, with both wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he will destroy its sinners from it. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be darkened in its going forth, and the moon will not cause its light to shine. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will halt the arrogance of the proud, and will lay low the haughtiness of the terrible." So what Matthew 24, verses 29 through 31 says is that when it's time for the guilty, that is Rome, to be punished, all the nations that allied with the guilty, Rome, will mourn, and all of God's elect will be one in being saved from the said punishment. This is the only explanation that makes sense. As if this was Judgment Day, there would be people thousands of years old. Not only that, but the very first word in verse 29 is immediately. This happened immediately after the tribulation Rome put the Jews and Christians through. So that covers the first 35 verses. What about the rest of the chapter? More proof that it's not talking about the final day of judgment. There would be no great sign that would be noticed. The Jews would be as they always have, and the nations would come suddenly in AD 70, and the Abomination of Desolation would begin. In the examples in the following verses, one will be taken, while the other would be left. And there was no watchman to warn them, so that the nation could flee. Jesus knew, and rightly warned his disciples decades before the event, that all of this would take place, and we confirm by history that it did take place. So there it is. With all of that context, I can only conclude that people who use what's written here to fearmonger others into expecting Christ to return at a certain time are in error. They are in error, and so are the people who heed the warnings from those erroneous people. I know that people are wanting a sign to warn them so that they can suddenly be faithful with an 11th hour obeying of the gospel. But there won't be a sign. We, like the Jews and Christians still in Jerusalem at that time should have been, must be ready. We must, because whether we die through physical means or if we are taken into heaven when Christ comes again, if we are in sin, we will not enter heaven. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.